All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you. Today's program is part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and our program today is The Journey of Renewal, President Clinton's 1994 State of the Union Address, and it's being presented by the Clinton Presidential Library and Museum. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a partnership between Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. It's a free series we put on every year from January all the way through April. This is just a quick reminder, by participating again today, you are agreeing to be recorded and archived. We do keep recordings of all of our programs on our YouTube channel so that teachers and students can access them later. That said, we're super excited to have you today, and we want you to participate as much as possible. If you haven't already found it, look for your chat box. It looks kind of like a caption bubble. Go ahead and click on that. We will use that as the primary way to interact today. You can also be on video if you'd like. If you'd like to be on video, go ahead and leave a message for me in the chat, and I will work on making that happen for you. Make sure that, again, participate as much as possible, but please be really respectful of those interactive tools. We want to make sure that any questions we're asking, any comments we're making are directly related to what our presenter is speaking about. And with that, I just want to thank you one more time. We're excited to have you. This is our website, so if you're looking to find out more information about our upcoming programs, which, as I mentioned, are every Tuesday and Thursday until April, or you're looking for recordings of our previous programs, you can find all that information here. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and pass it over to Kathleen, who you all came to see.
Awesome. Thank you. Super excited to be here today. Always enjoy doing programs with the Presidential Primary Sources Project. It's a great opportunity to reach a different audience across the country. And so I would love, as I'm pulling up my slideshow, I would love to see in the chat where you were joining. So you don't have to tell me the name of your school, just like a town and a state, because I might not recognize the name of your city. I'd love to see that in the chat. Right. Michigan, South Carolina. All right. Well, I am originally from Georgia, but I am now in Arkansas, in Little Rock at the Clinton Presidential Library. So we are a part of the National Archives and Records Administration. And the National Archives is a really cool independent federal agency. And it's really cool because they have this awesome building in Washington, D.C. And inside, they have records of our government dating back to the Declaration of Independence, even earlier than that. But my favorite document, my absolute favorite document in the National Archives is in the Rotunda. It's in between the Declaration and the Bill of Rights. Can anyone guess what I'm talking about? It's right there in the center. All right, I've got Maryland. I wonder if you're close enough to know, to have been. Anyone been to the National Archives? They have this special room. It's a circle with a vaulted ceiling. It's called the Rotunda. What is that document that tells us how our government works? Those sets up those branches of government, those checks and balances, separations of power. Constitution, Lakewood Elementary. Good job. So this is the Constitution. It's a 4-page document. Now they're big pages, but still, it's only 4 pages. And those 4 pages tell us how our government works. They also tell the president, the head of the executive branch, what their job is. Right. So we're going to dive a little deeper into the Constitution. So Article 1 of the Constitution sets up the legislative branch. So that is Congress, which we know there are 2 parts of Congress. Anybody know what those two parts are? I'm going to keep asking you to put stuff in the chat because that's how I know that you're out there because I can't see you, right? You can see me. It's a little unfair. So, anybody know the two parts of Congress? Congress is the legislative branch, that's who makes the laws, the federal laws that apply to everyone in the nation. Right. So, I see Senate and House. Perfect. The House and the Senate. Right. That's going to come up later. All right. So, Article 2, the executive branch, we see that the president has four roles that are defined in the Constitution. I like to call them the four C's because that helps me remember that the president is the chief executive, which means he executes or enforces the laws. He is our commander in chief, which means he's over all of the branches of the military. And you can see at the time the Constitution was written, that was just Army and Navy, right? So we've added to that. And then the president also manages our relationships with other countries. He is our chief diplomat, so he negotiates treaties and trade agreements, but he's also our ceremonial head of state. And when you think about the difference between those two things, I like to think about the United Kingdom, right? So the chief diplomat for the United Kingdom is the prime minister. Who do you think is the ceremonial head of state for the United Kingdom? The king. Absolutely. You are correct. Right? It's hard to get used to saying king instead of queen because Queen Elizabeth was the reigning monarchy for so long. So within Article 2, Section 2, it expands on that. The first little clip you see here is the president. It says principal offer of each of the executive department, principal officer of each of the executive departments. That's going to be the president's cabinet, his closest advisors. The president also nominates ambassadors, public ministers, judges of the Supreme Court, all those Supreme Court justices. So the part that I've highlighted, the white on blue at the bottom, in the Constitution, it says that the president, chief executive, shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the union. Right. So that's just a fancy way that's saying periodically, it doesn't say how often, but that the president should address Congress. We sometimes call that joint Congress because it's the Senate and the House together. Recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. Right? So the President of the United States does not create federal law or even the federal budget, but he lets Congress know what he's looking for, what he's going to support when it comes time to sign that piece of legislation into law. So imagine that you knew nothing about our country. Maybe you're an alien from outer space and you are suddenly going to be president. You would need to study the Constitution. So, who was our very first president? That's an easy one. The chat should be lighting up right now. Very first president. You know this. On the dollar bill. George Washington. Thank you. So, when George Washington became our very first president, he had his own copy of the Constitution. It was about this big, the narrow book. We actually got to have it at the Clinton Presidential Library many, many years ago. And it's hard to see, so I'll make it a little bigger. But he actually wrote in pencil in his Constitution, and this is Section 3 of Article 2, and he put little brackets by it. And in case you can't read his handwriting, that word says required. So, in the same way that I have a list of things that I need to do today, as our first president, George Washington, said, hey, I need to remember to do this. It's required. And so he kind of started that tradition of doing a State of the Union kind of at the beginning of the year, which is what we primarily see now. However, if you have been elected in the fall, right? Election day is going to be that first Tuesday in November, but and you're sworn in January 20th, after you're elected. So President Clinton was elected in 92, sworn in 93. That's what this photograph is. You might not really be able to speak to the State of the Union, right? You can't talk about what happened last year because what happened last year was under a different president, under a different administration. But you do have an opportunity at your swearing in ceremony to give an inaugural address. And President Clinton did that on the 20th of January in 1993. So, January 25th, 1994 is when he delivered his first official State of the Union. But I want you to look at those two gray blocks that are kind of in the middle of the timeline. In February of 1993, President Clinton um, delivered an address. It wasn't referred to as a State of the Union, but it was to a joint session of Congress. That's when you bring the House and the Senate together. He did that in February of 1993. He talked about the economy. And then in September of 1993, he made another address to a joint session of Congress about healthcare reform. And we're going to talk about that September address in just a minute. All right. So, the State of the Union address is a really big deal, right? It's a really big deal to pull the House and the Senate together. Typically, Supreme Court justices are also in attendance. So, you have all three branches of the government in one space having a conversation, right? And the president is laying out what he wants to accomplish for the year. So he's reflecting on what's come before and he's looking forward to the future, to the coming year. So a lot of effort goes into this. Now, presidents have a staff, right? We talked about their cabinet, right? Their closest advisors, but they also have a staff that supports them, helps them with scheduling, and there's a whole office that is the Office of Speech Writing. So these are people who are hired because they're smart, they know a lot of stuff and know where to find stuff, but primarily because they can write well. They can write well for something that's going to be delivered orally, so a presentation. So I want you to think about who you might get at school or at home if you had to give a big presentation, who you might get to help you write that speech. So President Clinton had a team and it started with this document here. And again, I'm going to make some sections bigger so you can see them. So this is from the very top of this document. And if you can't read that handwriting, it says phone comments, right? So they had a phone call. Any guesses about who BC is? BC comments. Bill Clinton. Yep, you got it, right? So it's funny because where I work is the William Jefferson Clinton Presidential Library and Museum, but Bill is a nickname. It's short for William, right? So these are his comments. Don't start with foreign policy. A theme is needed. For the crime section, we need to recreate the Memphis speech. So President Clinton had given a successful speech, an anti-crime speech in Memphis earlier the previous year, so in November of 93. All right. And if you saw those three arrows, we're going to look at the section marked by the second arrow and the section marked by the third arrow. Right? So he's laying out, right? We came into office a year ago, right? So he would have been sworn in on the 20th of January, 1993. The speech is being given on the 25th of January, 1994. And he's saying, look, it was bad. Americans voted for me because they wanted change. We made promises. We kept promises. And we're going to keep keeping promises, right? But he also wanted to recognize that people were worried. People were worried about personal safety. People were worried about health care. So he said, let's not start with foreign policy. Let's start with domestic. So that's the opposite of foreign. So domestic policy is what's happening at home in the United States. And then foreign policy are those relationships with other countries. Right. And I love here that he's going to talk about support for democracy in Russia. He's going to brag on Congress for supporting NAFTA and Russia. Right. The NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was to enhance and increase trade between the United States and Canada, the United States and Mexico. Right. So our neighbors to the north and our neighbors to the south. So remove some barriers there. And this was an interesting time with our relationship to Russia. Right. The Soviet Union had collapsed and Russia was on its own, and it was surrounded by countries that were previously a part of the Soviet Union. Right. So it's a really dynamic, maybe even volatile time. All right. And he's going to say it's a good beginning, but it's only a beginning. We're going to do more. He's going to promise to do more. A State of the Union address is an opportunity not just for the president to speak to Congress, but to speak to the American people, right? State of the Union addresses have been televised. The first televised State of the Union address was President Truman in 1957, right? And they didn't televise the whole thing. I can tell you in March of this year, when President Biden gives his State of the Union, it will be on all the major networks, and it will preempt any other shows that are on traditional networks. All right. So one of the resources that we have, one of the primary sources that we have at the Clinton Presidential Library and Museum. So I should say we house the records of the Clinton administration. We're one of 15 presidential libraries that are part of the National Archives. So we have over 80 million pages of records. So some of the more accessible records are the president's daily schedule. So his schedule for every day that he was in office. And so we can get a sense of his preparation for the State of the Union. Now it's interesting. Looking at the schedules, it becomes apparent President Clinton had a lot going on in January of 1994, and he didn't really start prepping for the speech until the day before. Right? He completely had his hands full. Right? He came off the holidays, and I looked at all of his schedules yesterday, so I'm going to look at my notes. He came off the holidays, then he gave a speech in Milwaukee on January 6th, on Friday the 7th, and then Saturday the 8th. He was in Hot Springs, Arkansas. His stepfather, Dick Kelly, had passed away, so he was at a funeral for that. And then he leaves that and goes straight to a NATO conference in Belgium. So that's January 8th through the 12th. He also stops and visits Václav Havel in the Czech Republic. He's the leader of the Czech Republic. So that's a NATO conference, then Czech Republic. Then he goes to Moscow the 13th through the 16th. 17th, he celebrates the King holiday at Howard University in DC. The next day, well, 2 days later, he's in Los Angeles. He's back in DC. He's entertaining like the King, King Hussein and Queen Noor of Egypt. And then the weekend before the State of the Union, he goes to Camp David, the presidential retreat, and takes 2 days off. Right. So it's a little last minute, right? So let's see, right? So this is showing you on this day, Monday the 24th, he has all of these meetings, but he is going to spend an hour and a half doing speech prep for the State of the Union in the Family Theater. Now, the good news for President Clinton is this team of speechwriters has been working on this speech since that very first meeting. Right. And this is the kind of thing where they would write sections. President Clinton would see it. He would respond to it. He would make changes to it, send it back. Those suggestions, those comments would get incorporated into the next draft of the speech. So what he's doing here in the Family Theater is he's actually reading through, a final draft. So he knows what he's saying and he agrees with what he's saying. And it looks like he spent another 2 hours doing that evening. So 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Now, the next day, this is really crunch time, right? This is Tuesday, the 25th. And we see at 9 o'clock in the morning, he's expected to be in the Oval Office or the Family Theater doing that prep. Right. But I want to point out the other things on his schedule all say TBA. Does anyone know what TBA means? And Lakewood, I'm going to be announced. Perfect. Right. So nothing in his schedule is set that day, only that work on the State of the Union, because he may not be able to have these other meetings. He may not have time. Now, Lakewood has asked a question about, did President Clinton memorize the speech? And I'm going to talk about that in a couple of slides because it's kind of a funny story about speech, giving speeches, right? So all of those other briefings and meetings are all to be announced and may not even happen because the State of the Union happens. And it's interesting to me, it happens about 9 o'clock at night, right? So that's 9 o'clock on the East Coast. So 8 o'clock Central Time, I'm on Central Time, 7 o'clock Mountain Time, 6 o'clock Pacific. Now I'm trying to remember if we had, why so late? Why do you think? Why would it be important wait until it's 6 o'clock on the West Coast? What are people in California doing at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock? When do most people get off work, right? 5 o'clock. So 5 o'clock would be 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So having it at 9 o'clock Eastern makes it 6 o'clock Pacific. So that's giving everybody a chance to get home from work to be able to watch the speech. Now, it's hard to imagine now, but in 1994, for most of the 90s, the web, the internet, was not the resource that it is today. So going back the next day or later the same day and watching the speech online was not an option. But you'll see that time has kind of stayed late, So if you're going to be on camera in front of the entire nation, in front of the entire world, you might want to get a little makeup done. Nothing too heavy, maybe a little powder on the nose so it's not shiny on the camera. And you can see that's we've got 15 minutes set aside on the president's schedule. And then he's going to get in a presidential limousine and ride over to the US Capitol. Just a short ride down Pennsylvania Avenue. And I want to point out three things on this schedule page. First thing, we see the president and the first lady depart White House by a motorcade. It's just going to take 5 minutes. And then they arrive at the US Capitol and proceed to hold. But now let's think about what is here in the middle. And I know it's on my screen, it's a little out of focus, but that word is redacted. Redacted. What do you think redacted means? Where something would be, they put a big white block. I'm going to take these off so you can see a big white block with the word redacted. What? Hidden. Yes, exactly. If we could take that off, what we would see would be the route that the president is going to take from the White House to the US Capitol. And we can't see it because a future president, our current president, might take the same route. So that route is something that we don't get to look at. It's redacted, right? In the old days, they would take like a Sharpie and like mark it out so you couldn't read it. All right, redacted. So here is President Clinton with one of his aides. This is George Stephanopoulos. They have stepped into the presidential limousine. You might recognize this image. It was the one that we used to promote this program. And President Clinton's reading over his speech, right? And he may be making last minute changes. George Stephanopoulos has a pen in his hand and in his mouth. He's got the tip in his mouth. He's thinking, right? So this is like finishing your homework on the bus. He's on the way to Congress, to the Capitol. All right, so there are, well, actually, I'll ask you, do you know how many senators there are? Each state, regardless of how big, how much population, how many people, the population, there are 100. Yes, Galileo, fifth grade class, there are 100, two for each state. But then the House is much bigger. It has 435 representatives in the House of Representatives. Why do some states have more representatives than others? Why do you think that's the case? I know Arkansas has 4. Some places in the Pacific Northwest just have 3. But they're bigger size-wise. Yes, Lakewood, more population. So that was a compromise that was a part of the Constitution, that the Senate would be equal representation, that the House would reflect your population. So you'll notice the State of the Union address is taking place in the House chamber because it's a much bigger space. And the president is going to start talking at 9 o'clock sharp, and they anticipate that he's going to be done at 9:35. So 35 minutes to cover everything you want to cover, to reflect on everything you've done in the past year, to think about, to promote what you want to do for the coming year. All right, so we're going to watch. Is it always that short? Actually, President Clinton's 1994 State of the Union was the second longest. To that date, Lyndon Johnson had given a State of the Union that was longer. So it's a lot of words, and it's really interesting when you look at the final draft of the speech and then compare it to everything that President Clinton said, right? Because I can tell you the part we're about to watch was not in the draft. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. I'm going to make sure my closed captions are on.
Third Congress, my fellow Americans, I'm not at all sure what speech is in the teleprompter tonight, but I hope we can talk about the State of the Union. I ask you.
Okay, so President Clinton said, I'm, welcome. I don't know what's in the teleprompter, but I hope we can talk about the State of the Union. Oh, Galileo, fifth grade. Absolutely. There's a lot of clapping. You're going to see that. We're going to watch another clip. Um, when, okay, he's not following the teleprompter. So this is great. So here's what happened. He made a joke pretending that what was on the teleprompter was not the speech that he was expecting to give. What happened is, remember those two joint addresses that happened between his inauguration and the State of the Union in 1994? The first one was on the economy, right? That was in February of 93. And then he talked about healthcare in September of 93. And when he went to give the healthcare speech in September, they had loaded the speech on the teleprompter from February. They loaded the economy speech. So for the first 10 minutes of his speech, President Clinton was not using a teleprompter. And so I want you to look at where he's looking when he's talking in this clip, because he's not looking at the teleprompter, because what's on it is not what's supposed to be on
it. Is an argument and information. The American people would be proud to know that earlier this week, when a healthcare university was held for members of Congress just to try to give everybody the same amount of information, over 320 Republicans and Democrats signed up and showed up for 2 days just to learn the basic facts of the complicated problem before us.
Right. So he's looking at the audience, which he will do during the State of the Union. But the point of a teleprompter, and I don't know if you've ever seen a teleprompter up close, and you can actually use your smartphone for this, but the point of using a teleprompter is that the words are where you should be looking for the camera, right? So throughout this presentation, I've been trying to look directly at my camera and not at the things on the screen, because when I look down, I'm not looking at you. And when I look over in the chat, I'm not looking at you. But I'm also not the president, so it's okay if I look around or look down. So he doesn't necessarily memorize the speech, but he practices it a lot. He has a lot of input into what's there. And so he knows what he wants to say, but it's much easier when the teleprompter has the right speech on it. Right? So, yes, it is a good thing that he prepped, right? It's always better to be prepared and prepared for things to go wrong, right? You just don't know, particularly with technology. You just don't know. You don't have control over everything. So, let's go. Okay, so we've done that. So we're going to watch this little clip of him at the State of the Union, and he's going to look more at the camera because the teleprompter is correct. And in this section, he's going to reveal what they decided on as the theme. In that very early document, BC Comments, it said, let's not start with foreign policy, and let's think about what we want our theme to be, that overall message to be.
Though we are making a difference, our work has just begun. Many Americans still haven't felt the impact of what we've done. The recovery still hasn't touched every community or created enough jobs. Incomes are still stagnant. There's still too much violence and not enough hope in too many places. Abroad, the young democracies we are strongly supporting still face very difficult times and look to us for leadership. And so tonight, let us resolve to continue the journey of renewal, to create more and better jobs, to guarantee health security for all, to reward welfare, work over welfare, to promote democracy abroad, and to begin to reclaim our streets from violent crime and drugs and gangs, to renew our own American community.
Right. So you saw the clapping every time that the president makes a point that members of the audience, so those are representatives and senators, that they agree with, they're going to clap. Right. And sometimes that clapping will last for, several minutes. Right. And what President Clinton did in that clip was lay out kind of what he was going to talk about throughout the speech. So this is a good tip, whether you're writing a speech or you're writing a paper, right? In that introduction, you kind of want to tell people what you're going to talk about, right? What you're going to write about, right? This is what I want to say to you. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about jobs. I want to talk about healthcare. I want to talk about people being safe in their communities, right? I want you to we as a nation need to continue this journey of renewal. We did some great things last year, but it didn't improve life for everyone. And we need to keep going. So this is a word cloud made of the text of the 1994 State of the Union address. And so the bigger a word, the more often it appears. So that biggest word, people, President Clinton is showing that he's concerned, that he cares about the American people, the public. And what does he want for them? We see the word care, we see the word work, we see the word health. Some are blue, some are red, because those are the colors that I picked for the word cloud. They could have been purple and green. Why do you think I picked red and blue with a white background? Those are some of my favorite colors. Patriotic, yes. Yes, the American flag. So that red, white, and blue. That's why I picked those colors. So big people, next down, care, work, health. And then smaller, Congress, Americans, system, jobs, time, every. Right. So word cloud is not it's not a list, but it's a graphic representation of the words that he said, with the words that he said more often being larger. All right, so this was just the briefest of introductions to President Clinton's 1994 State of the Union address and to the records that we hold here at the Clinton Presidential Library. So being a part of the National Archives is a really big deal, because the National Archives, what the National Archives is and does, is part of what makes our country a democracy. So having access to the records of our government allows us to hold elected and appointed officials accountable, right? We get to look at their records. We get to evaluate past administrations, current administration. And that's not just a right, it's a responsibility. When you're old enough to vote, the idea is that you're going to look at candidates, and if they're an incumbent, if they've been in office before, you're going to look at what they've done, and you're going to evaluate that, and you're going to decide if you want that candidate to serve another term. So we have a huge collection of records. A lot of them, a big chunk, actually, it's a small portion because we have so many, but it's still a lot of records are available through the Clinton Digital Library, which is accessible at clinton.presidentiallibraries.us. You can look at the president's daily schedule. We did some of that in this presentation. You can also look at the daily schedule for First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton. There are things called topical research guides, digital library exhibits that focus on a particular collection. There's a digital library exhibit about all of President Clinton's State of the Union addresses. Yes, we do have some letters to the president. Not all of those have been digitized. We do have some really cool letters to the president that are on display in our museum. I don't know if anyone knows who Mr. Rogers was. He had a television show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And we've got a great letter that he wrote to President Clinton out in our museum. We also have some letters that kids wrote to President Clinton. You can also look at the president's travel schedule. You can look at notes from when he had meetings or phone calls with foreign leaders. It's a great resource. It's a great place to find presidential primary sources. All right. So I've mentioned several times that we're part of the National Archives. The National Archives has an initiative called Civics for All of Us, which offers a series of virtual programs. You can sign up to view them as part of a webinar, or you can request a program if you have a group of 10 or more students. So I just want to point out that that is there. Civics for All of Us. We've got some upcoming programs. We've got two programs on Monday. Those times are listed as Easter. I'll be doing the second program. And then on Tuesday, the 20th of February, I'll be doing both programs, the one at 11:15 and the one at 1:15. So I see a question in the chat about President Clinton and does he visit our library? And he does. He does. He was here over the holidays. He was here for a staff holiday party that was also a volunteer appreciation party. And he was here that same 2 days. We opened a new exhibit called Be Our Guest, which is about state visits. So leaders of foreign countries coming to visit the White House. And so he was here for the opening of that exhibit as well. He's coming back in February for some different programs. Do I get to talk to him? Not usually. He's very busy. He does programs, he meets with people. For example, in February, he's going to be meeting with a group called Presidential Leadership Scholars, which are people who have applied and been accepted into a special program where they visit the Clinton Library, George H.W. Bush Library, George W. Bush Library, and the Johnson Library. Not a question, but we noticed America was not capitalized on the word cloud. So I'm going to blame the word cloud software. So it's just a simple site where you take the text, you dump it in, and you hit the button go. So I'm not sure, because I can tell you America would have been capitalized in the text of the State of the Union address. So the videos that I shared today are available through our YouTube channel. And that's the last thing on the list here, Clinton Library 42. That's a great resource. We also, when we're doing programs like PPSP or Civics for All of Us, we're posting things about those programs on Facebook, Instagram. Forgive me for putting Twitter. Of course, that is now X. And then there are all kinds of great videos on our YouTube channel. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them in the chat, Or if you would like to email me directly, kathleen.pate@nara.gov or clintonlibrary.gov is our website. So that's our main website. It's different from the digital library. That's a great place to go to learn about upcoming events. We have some teacher resources there, upcoming professional development. Yes, does the rest of Clinton's family visit? They do. They do on occasion. We had a couple of big events here last year where all three, so that would be President Clinton, his wife, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton, and his daughter, Chelsea Clinton. So they've all been here at the same time in the past couple of years. All right, I will stop sharing my screen. I'm not seeing any more questions.